Okay, we'll start with this. In light of the recent news that Caleb Plant versus Canelo Alvarez is going to be revisited, that chapter in this story, it's not over. Dan Rafael tweeted, FYI, Caleb Plant did take the fight. It broke down over things Canelo was asking for, to which Caleb Plant retweeted, listen up. I'm sure that Caleb, in his own mind, feels vindicated right now. I'm sure that he does, but the reality of things is that when the fight was falling apart, Caleb didn't offer to cross over and have the fight on the DAZN side of things, even though they offered to do the fight.
It wasn't all on Fox to do it.
DAZN offered to do the fight as well, and when Fox couldn't get the deal done, when they couldn't get it right for Canelo Alvarez,
Caleb was going to let the parade go by.
And it's just a question of why. Why is the fight happening on the Fox PBC side of things a sticking point for Caleb Plant?
Is it because he can't leave the island?
Your guess is as good as mine. We're not talking about crossing the street for Demetrius Andrade or somebody like that, a Smith or a Saunders. No. We're talking about crossing the street for a Canelo Alvarez. And when Fox couldn't get the deal right,
Caleb didn't offer to let DAZN do it.
Don't forget who's in the driver's seat here. Don't forget who's in charge. If this fight has resurfaced as a talking point, it's only because the Alvarez people want to revisit it.
If they wanted the fight to stay dead, it would have stayed dead.
And if Canelo Alvarez weren't the legacy fighter that he is, pursuing the undisputed crown at 168 pounds,
we wouldn't be talking about any of this right now.
If he were more like a PBC fighter, more like those PBC fighters like Jermall Charlo, who's quite content holding that WBC title hostage. He's not interested in unifying it with Demetrius Andrade. If he were more like Gervonta Davis, who's quite content fighting for regular titles at different weights as opposed to full ones.
If Canelo were all worried about sides of the street,
the way that those guys are, the way that Caleb Plant is, believe you me, we wouldn't be here right now. That's why Canelo Alvarez has decided to move forward as both a network and promotional free agent, because he ain't like these guys. He's not on anybody's leash. He does what he wants, how he wants, where he wants, and that's the only reason we're still talking about this fight.
Baby Caleb has a curfew.
He's not allowed to cross the street. None of those indentured servants are allowed to cross the street unless Daddy Heyman says so. Saw a rather interesting article published shortly after news broke by way of The Athletic that reads, talks between Alvarez, Reynoso, and Plant's powerful manager, Premier Boxing Champions head Al Heyman, broke off last week and were declared dead following disagreements over deal points. Reynoso emphasized Friday, we are free agents and go fight by fight and have no interest in doing a two-fight package with Heyman, who also represents potential Alvarez opponents in middleweight champion Jermall Charlo and unbeaten former WBC super middleweight champion David Benavidez.
Now, why do you think it is Eddie Reynoso stressed that?
Why do you think it is on the heels of news breaking that they're going to revisit that fight? Eddie Reynoso felt it important to stress that they're not going to do any multi-fight deals with Al Heyman. They're not interested. They want their freedom.
Isn't that what I've been telling you all along?
Isn't that what I told you that I suspect was one of the issues they were experiencing? Caleb Plant running to the media is only one side of the story.
Regardless of what he said.
These comments from Eddie Reynoso, this isn't the first we've heard of Al Heyman and the PBC wanting to lock Canelo Alvarez in to some kind of a multi-fight engagement, multi-fight arrangement. No. The article that Mike Coppinger published by way of ESPN about 10, 11 days ago, there was some mention in there about Al Heyman trying to lock Canelo Alvarez in to some kind of a multi-fight deal. And I told you, that's going to be a problem. I'm of the opinion that what Al Heyman hopes to do is to have all his guys at or around these weights get in line, single file, for their shot at Canelo Alvarez, one by one, so that he can bill every single one of those fights as a pay-per-view that comes at an additional cost to me and you. That's what I think. And I don't actually know how Canelo Alvarez and Eddie Reynoso feel about that. I don't know that the extent of their interest isn't really limited to procuring that last brass ring, that red belt. I don't know that Canelo Alvarez and Eddie Reynoso want to be a part of the PBC's bottom line, but rest assured, That is what their bottom line is.
No, they don't want to make those guys fight each other.
Not that long ago, they had 2 of the 4 super middleweight champions at this weight. No emphasis was placed on making that fight a reality, making it happen. When David Benavidez still had the WBC title, Caleb Plant had the IBF, still has it. They didn't make that fight. Instead, they were going to have David defend his title against Romer Angulo, and he ends up blowing the weight. Here and now, David Benavidez, he hasn't expressed interest in facing Jermall Charlo, and where are we with that?
Nowhere.
If the PBC has it their way, they want Canelo Alvarez to fight every one of these guys so that they can bill every single one of those fights as a pay-per-view.
Once again, I don't know how Canelo feels about that.
Very recently I saw the comments from the spineless worm that is Leonard Ellerbe saying things like, Canelo Alvarez can't beat Caleb Plant, and the matchup is all wrong for him. He said he can't beat Caleb. He can't beat Caleb because Caleb has all the wrong things for him. Trust and believe that, because you guys have only seen is glimpses of Plant. Because again, everybody don't rise to the occasion of the level of the opponent that they face. But given the opportunity against a big name on the big stage, and styles make fights, he has everything that he needs to beat Canelo. Everything.
This fucking clown.
I got more than a glimpse of Caleb Plant. More than just a glimpse. I got 12 rounds.
Which is roughly 36 minutes.
Caleb Plant waltzing around the ring with Caleb Truax. Caleb Truax, who he could not dispatch, who he could not close the show against. And I don't want to hear all the hyperbole votes of confidence from Leonard Smellerby. Ultimately, if you can't close the show against an over-the-hill, past-it, shot fighter in his late 30s, if you can't close the show against a guy like that, don't sell me this dream about what he's going to do against Canelo Alvarez. When that's what's going on, it's not about you rising to the occasion or not rising to the occasion. If that's what's going on, it's because you're not that good.
That's why that's happening.
Do you think this is what this jackass would be saying if it were Canelo that went the distance with Caleb Truax? What would people say?
Do you think he'd be saying that if it were Canelo that went the distance with Juan Montiel?
These guys, they like to bide their time waiting for Canelo by fighting fucking nobodies. And even when they're fighting these fucking nobodies, they underwhelm, they underperform, so that Leonard Smellerby can turn around and sell you this fucking dream about how Caleb's all wrong for Canelo.
Oh, really? So how much money do you have on Caleb?
Now that the fight's back on, how much are you actually willing to stand by your word as if it's worth anything?
Can we put a price on those statements?
Now that the fight's back on, or it could be, how much money do you have riding on Caleb Plant being all wrong for Canelo? Caleb Plant is just another fighter looking to cash out.
On your island.
If he had any real ambition, he wouldn't be hiding behind Al Heyman's skirt and all his network and promotional politics.
Like the rest of those guys.
The cash out kings of PBC Island, who aren't great. They're not great. They're good. And they're only good up until a certain point. And once they get to that point, they don't really want to know.
The way Jermall doesn't want to know with Demetrius.
You can say what you want. I'm not convinced that Caleb actually wants this fight, but he's willing to go through with it because he can cash out in doing so. And it was Roberto Diaz of Golden Boy Promotions on the Hispanics Causing Panic podcast who said it best, in my opinion.
And that's the difference today. A lot of fighters see that Canelo as the sweepstakes, the lottery ticket. If I fight him, I got my retirement check, win or lose or draw. And that's not how it was in the past. You know what? Sugar Ray Leonard fought Marvin Hagler because I want to beat him and I want to go down as the greatest and I believe I can beat him. And, Duran fought, they all fought each other. Why? Because they believed they can win or they wanted to try to win and be great and go down in history. And that's not what we're having today. Right now, it's like, I just want to fight them because I want to get paid.
They're only good to a certain point. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it because when I think about these fighters and how they stack up with the other fighters that Canelo Alvarez has fought so far, a long array of world champions and top contenders, where does a Jermall Charlo fit into that conversation, for example? I mean, how's Jermall Charlo's resume stack up against, say, Billy Joe Saunders' resume? We know that Billy's campaign as a super middleweight champion was rather abysmal, but his middleweight run, he actually fought some who's who fighters. More fighters than Jermall Charlo has fought so far.
Who'd he beat that's supposed to make him so special?
PBC's cult of apologists and spin doctors have quickly taken to berating Canelo Alvarez, berating his opponents.
But they're real high on guys like Jermall Charlo.
And one is left to wonder why. What's his signature win, after all. Who has he fought at either 154 or 160 pounds that we're supposed to hold him over guys like Billy Joe Saunders and Callum Smith? I mean, what is Jermall Charlo's signature win?
The guy Danny Jacobs and Golovkin beat already?
A year after Golovkin beat him, a full year of inactivity, coming off a loss. Is that Jermall Charlo's signature win? Is that the victory that makes him head and shoulders a better fighter than, say, Billy Joe Saunders or Callum Smith?
The fuck are you on drugs?
Beating Sergey Derevyanchenko after a loss and a year of inactivity is supposed to be better than beating, say, Chris Eubank Jr. and John Ryder and Andy Lee and David Lemieux and Willie Monroe.
No.
Just no. The boxing math, it's just not adding up. What is supposed to make Jermall Charlo stand out, distinguish himself from the guys that Canelo Alvarez has fought so far? Not limited to Billy Joe Saunders and Callum Smith, Daniel Jacobs as well.
He has a better middleweight resume than Jermall does also.
I mean, not only did Danny beat Sergey Derevyanchenko before Jermall Charlo beat him, he also beat him before Gennady beat him, and that's not all that Danny did in the middleweight division.
He didn't just take Sergey Derevyanchenko's O.
He took Peter Quillen's O as well. After just one round, he managed to stop that guy. Before that, he actually fought Caleb Truax, a younger Caleb Truax than the one that Caleb Plant just faced in his last fight. And Danny, unlike Caleb, he actually managed to stop him.
In 12 rounds.
Caleb wasn't approaching 40 when Danny did it. No, Caleb was a very spry 31 years old. Not 36 or 37 like he was. Caleb Plant fought him.
But it's Jermall and Caleb Plant that Canelo needs to worry about.
Yeah, fucking right. I'll go as far as saying that, listen, they're not bad fighters, Jermall Charlo and Caleb Plant. They're good, but they're only good up until a certain point. And once they reach that point, they don't want to know. They don't want to know anymore. Once they reach that point, they're ready to stand in line, single file, and cash out for a Canelo fight. So long as that fight happens on the PBC Fox side of things. So long as they're doing their master's bidding.
Jermall Charlo's nothing special.
Nothing for Canelo to worry about. I'm sorry. Out of all the potential opponents out there in the boxing cosmos that Canelo Alvarez might land on beyond a Caleb Plant fight, I view Jermall Charlo as the weakest link. I think he borders on a cherry pick compared to what else is out there. I mean, Artur Beterbiev, Dmitry Bivol, at either 172 or 175 pounds. These are more credible threats to Canelo than Jermall Charlo is. At 168, I'd wager David Benavidez is a more credible threat to Canelo than Jermall is. Jermall, that guy borders on being a cherry pick.
He's actually the weakest link.
And I'm not against Canelo Alvarez giving Jermall Charlo an opportunity beyond a Caleb Plant fight, because I told you, all these guys, they're interchangeable. Canelo Alvarez has already fought two unbeaten world champions whose bodies of work, comparatively, are more robust than Jermall Charlo's is, so
Don't pee on my leg and tell me it's raining.
there's nothing special about that guy. There's nothing special about Caleb Plant either. Sorry. He just went the distance with a very over-the-hill and past it Caleb Truax.
Guy's 37 years old.
Caleb Plant, he couldn't put him away. He couldn't stop him the way that Daniel Jacobs stopped him years ago.
When he was younger and didn't have as many losses.
The truth is that Canelo Alvarez has already fought better fighters than either Caleb Plant or Jermall Charlo. Hell, the only one of those PBC guys I think stands a decent chance of giving Canelo a good fight, that'd have to be David Benavidez.
Yeah, that kid seems more solid than they do.
That's probably why Jermall Charlo doesn't want to fight him.
He's not in the business of fighting solid fighters.
Especially not big ones that are coming into their prime years. No. Jermall Charlo is in the business of is biding his time against low-level opponents, waiting for Canelo Alvarez to give him a call, waiting for his chance to win the sweepstakes.
Canelo's already fought better fighters than these guys, man.
And, beyond this Caleb Plant fight, I don't actually know what the Canelo Alvarez people intend on doing. I don't know where they plan on going. Do they plan on returning to the light heavyweight division, or might they so decide to pick a cherry in Jermall Charlo? Because that's what he is. He is the weakest link, after all. I mean, look at his last fight. He's going a distance with the likes of a Juan Montiel, a guy that Jaime Munguia stopped years ago. Don't believe the hype.
What the fuck is supposed to make Jermall such a good fighter?
I'm telling you, these guys, they're not bad fighters. They're good. They're good up until a certain point, certain level. And once they reach that level, they don't want to know. And you never know. Maybe Canelo Alvarez makes this fight with Caleb Plant for November. Maybe he beats him and he decides to take it easy, pick a cherry in Jerry Charlo, because he ain't that good to begin with. Jermall Charlo strikes me as a guy who's plateaued since that Julian Williams fight. Very dynamic knockout off of a counter uppercut as Julian Williams was lunging in. If Jermall actually has a signature fight or a signature win, I'd say that's it. And the problem with that is, up until that point, Julian Williams hadn't beaten anybody. He was just an unbeaten contender with no quality scalps on his resume.
And that fucking fight was years ago.
He's asking you a question, Roberto. He says, please settle the online debate. Can you confirm if Golden Boy did indeed offer Jermall Charlo a Canelo match for May of 2019? There's been a lot of talk about that online, but we don't know for sure. But could you answer that question?
Absolutely. Eric Gomez called Al, made him an offer, and I believe, and it was a few years ago, but I believe the reply was, we are worlds apart. And the offer was more than Charlo's made so far. So, I mean...
And we, the boxing fans, we're supposed to ignore all of this. Why? Because Jermall Charlo's fought so many great fighters since then?
No, that can't be it, because he hasn't.
I can take Roberto Diaz's word for it, because this is in keeping with what we've been seeing from the PBC for the last 5 or 6 years, from Danny Garcia willfully rejecting a Pacquiao fight, before Manny was beaten by Jeff Horn, by the way. From Danny Garcia rejecting a Pacquiao fight to Jermall Charlo rejecting a Canelo fight. It's a pattern with these guys. An established pattern.
They're just a bunch of indentured servants.
I don't think that either one of these guys wants the Canelo fight all that bad. I just think they're doing their master's bidding.
No, I don't think they want to prove that they're the best.
They've had ample opportunity to do that. That ain't the kind of fighters they are. All they are pawns, puppets, and muppets. Al Heyman and his network affiliates pull their strings, okay? These guys ain't legacy fighters.